Welcome to MindStaq, the future of enterprise-level project management. Whether you're a manager, a team member, or an executive, MindStaq's minimalist design and powerful capabilities have something for everyone. In today's presentation, we're going to cover the basics of waterfall project management using MindStaq. We'll create a waterfall project and add some team members, and then we'll look at the all-important start date property of the project settings. The start date is critical to calculate the schedule of the project. We'll then define the work breakdown structure, which is the tasks that the project must accomplish to be complete. We'll then order the tasks using dependencies. The most basic type of dependency we're going to use is the finish to start dependency, which is when the second task can only start after the first task has finished. We'll also do start-to-start dependencies, which allow you to do tasks in parallel. We'll look at an alternative method of viewing and updating dependencies in the task window. We'll use the Backlog feature, which is unique to MindStaq, which allows you to keep track of unscheduled work that arises as the project progresses. This is typical in real-life complex projects where all tasks can't be anticipated. Finally, we'll look at updating your project plan and recalculating the project schedule as tasks progress. Let's get started with creating a waterfall project. On the project's dashboard, you'll see the plus button, which is to create any kind of new project. You can enter a title, select the type, in this case waterfall. The other two types are agile and operational, and then click the Create Project button. We've already created a project, an empty one called Exchange Server Migration to Cloud as our example. Once a project is created, you get an empty dashboard, a project dashboard, and on the right hand side you can add team members. At the moment we've added one team member. We're going to add a few more. So we'll select them just by typing a couple of letters of the name. You can find people in your workspace that are part of your organization to add to the project. Please note that if the person is not listed, it's because they don't have a MindStaq account and have not been joined to your workspace yet. So that's something that needs to be done by the MindStaq administrator. Once you have your team in place, you can start planning your project. The first thing to think about is the start date. So we click on the gear icon to get project settings, and here's where we see the start date. So let's start by putting the start date as next week to see the impact of the start date. You notice that the scheduling method is set to waterfall and the status is planning. As we've discussed in other videos, planning mode means that this project is not visible to anyone except project managers in the team. This allows you to plan the project without people seeing an early version of the project that is not ready to be viewed. We can now think about what is the work breakdown structure of the project. The first thing to do is go to the timeline view. The timeline is the Gantt chart view, the classic Gantt chart of your waterfall projects. The project is the first task listed here, and then you can add subtasks to that project task. So for example, we could have a initiation phase that we can add to this project. Notice that I called it a phase because I intend to have some tasks underneath this initiation phase. To create a subtask, you simply click the plus button on the task, which will be the parent of those subtasks. So for another phase, I would click the plus button up here on the main project. For a subtask of initiation phase, I would have to come to the initiation phase row and click the plus button here. So here I'm going to say that we have to have a typical kickoff meeting for the project. So that automatically creates this task, and you can see the task is in blue, and the task group, or roll up as is called sometimes in other tools, is in green here. So this is now simply a summary of the tasks that are inside it. We can expand the size of the kickoff meeting, for example, to 2 days just by dragging that bar on the Gantt chart. I can also resize the panel to get more room, or I can also shrink things by switching to week view or month view to see larger project schedules. Now that I've had the initiation phase and the kickoff meeting added to this, I'll add one more task to initiation phase to summarize the scope of the work, or to talk to the customer, the internal customer of this migration project, about their requirements. So let's call this customer requirements plan. So we added one more task. We'll make that 2 days long as well. Now I'm going to demonstrate a small feature where you can use AI to help plan your tasks. So I'm going to ask the AI assistant to go ahead and give me some suggestions for some tasks that I can add to this project. That'll take a few seconds while the AI assistant thinks, and the suggestions are really heavily based on what is the title of your project. In this case, our title is Exchange Server Migration to Cloud. Once we get the suggestions, we can review them and see if they're meaningful. These look pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and create the suggested tasks. And since I'm adding it to my existing plan that was in progress, I need to click the refresh button to bring in the new tasks. And there I've got a bunch of tasks in there now. So this helps plan your project a little bit, get you started, but it's simply a set of suggested tasks. You still need to review your plan and your work breakdown structure in detail to figure out if you have the right tasks in there. Now comes the part where we think about how we link these tasks together. Before I do anything else, assuming that I've added all the tasks in the work breakdown structure on the left-hand side, and I'm happy with it, I can then start doing the dependencies. An easy way to get started with dependencies is to assume that every task is going to be finished to start, which means that the next task will start when the previous task is finished. We can create dependencies simply by dragging the circle at the end of the task, which is the finish. The circle at the beginning of the task signifies the start. So the finish circle of this task is dragged to the start circle of the next task. And I can then drag the finish circle of this task, the last task of initiation phase here, to the first task of the project planning phase. Notice that I'm not linking the groups themselves, like project planning or initiation phase, because those groups are not tasks, they're groups of tasks. The relationships ideally should be between tasks that are actually executed. The group is simply a summary of the children or the child tasks inside them. So I'm going to proceed with quickly dragging and dropping these tasks. One thing about drag and drop is that if your plan is quite large, as time progresses and scrolls, you can also drag the endpoint of the task to the bar here, so that you don't have to be super precise about connecting to that dot. That makes it a little easier for those who are challenged by a oversensitive mouse, or if you simply want to make sure that you're linking to the right task. So you could do it this way, or you could do it that way. So we're nearly done with linking these tasks using a finish to start relationship. Finish of one task to start another. Now that I've linked all the tasks in my plan, I can now click the auto schedule button. This is the button that factors in the project start date we used earlier, which was 11th December 2023, as well as the dependencies to calculate the actual project schedule. When I click that, we get a summary of what's going to happen. First thing you're going to notice is that the first task, the kickoff meeting, has been moved from December 4th to a revised start of December 11th, because that was the project start date we selected in the settings. We then see that all the other tasks are appropriately moved based on their relationships giving us a final date for the end of the project of Jan 20th, 2024. I can discard the changes or commit the changes. I'm going to go ahead and commit. And now, if I go to the week view, you see that nice waterfall structure that is typical of a waterfall plan. Let's talk about things that we might want to change after we've done this initial plan. The first thing that we might want to change is we might want to refine a particular task into subtasks. In that situation, we come to the task involved, and we click the plus button and start creating subtasks. So let's say that identifying potential issues involves identifying migration issues as well as identifying user experience issues. And let's add a third one, security issues. So we've now refined this task, identify potential issues, into 3 subtasks. At this point, we can see on the Gantt, so if I look at this here, we can see the relationships are now going to the task, which is now a group. And what we've got to do is simply double click to open the relationship pop-up, delete that, and relink this to the first task. Similarly, the outbound relationship, delete that. Connect these tasks together in whatever way makes sense, and then the final task gets connected to the next task in the sequence. We then click the auto schedule button, and we have a revised plan where identify potential issues is now a group with 3 subtasks. Up to this point, we have explored the finish to start dependency, which is used when a task must start only after its predecessor has finished. In the newly created group, identifying potential issues, let's assume that 3 different people could potentially work on these issues in parallel. And so we don't really want to have each of these tasks be 1 day long in sequence, creating 3 days. Rather, we'd have 3 days available to 3 different people to work on each of these tasks and finish at the same time. In that situation, what we want is a start-to-start relationship. This task and this task can start at the same time. To do this, the first thing we do is we delete the finish-to-start relationship and we drag the start of this task to the start of that task. Similarly, I'm going to delete the finish-to-start over there and link the start of this task, user experience issues, to this task, security issues. At this point, if I was to hit the auto schedule button, we would see that the 3 tasks are now starting at the same time. Let's give the original 3 working days, so I'm skipping the weekend here, for each of these tasks so that we can have 3 days applied to all 3 kinds of issues being documented and identified for this project. The important thing now is to make sure that the other end of these tasks, which is currently left open, has a dependency that identifies what task should come after this task, or what task cannot start until these tasks are completed. So to do that, what we'll do is we will link these, since we have backup current system as the task that follows security issues. Let's assume that backing up the current system will not be done until all 3 of these tasks has been completed. So once we do that, we can hit the auto schedule button, and now we have a proper relationship with parallel starts, as well as the outbound side of that relationship, which is what future task is impacted by each of these tasks, which is something we must do to ensure that the critical path method that is used to calculate the schedule works correctly. Let's also look at another kind of change. What if we wanted to control the sequence of these tasks and we decide that we need to change them? This is easily accomplished using simple drag and drop. The drag and drop in the Gantt chart allows you to either move a task up and down. For example, let's say that we want to identify the stakeholders and define roles before we define any project scope and objectives. We simply click and drag the task up. The little blue bar is illustrating whether the task is going to be dropped on another task as a subtask or placed above that task as a sibling task. So if I drag it over there, it's going to stay up here, and you can see in the Gantt chart that it's now moved up. It does not automatically change the relationships on here. We'll have to come and adjust that in a second. But what I'm doing first is getting this order the way we want it. So let's assume that we want to define project objectives, then project scope, after identifying stakeholders, and finally project plan. Once I've done this, I can simply rearrange my relationships as we've seen before, where we clean them up. Simply click delete on the relationships that are now no longer incorrect, and let's rearrange them. So we want this task to come to that one, this task to come to that one, that task to come to this one, and finally this task to come to this one. If I click auto schedule, I will now see that everything is in the right order. And our plan is back to being properly sequenced. We have our waterfall after we reordered the tasks. Let's also look at a situation where the parent of a task needs to change, meaning we're moving a task from one group to another group. So the easy way to do this would be, first, we can clean up that relationship link and then drag and drop this to the parent we want. Let's say we want to have the identify stakeholders in the initiation phase. So we'll move that to the bottom of the initiation phase, link that back here, and this is now moving to define project objectives as before. That relationship gets preserved. If we click auto schedule, there's nothing to change because the number of days was the same. We simply changed which group identify stakeholders belong to. We moved it from project planning to the initiation phase. So that's how you can make changes to your plan once you've done the initial plan and you suddenly realize that either you have more detail to create subtasks, or you want to reorder tasks, or you want to parent a task to a different group. Let's now talk about performing some of these operations, like adding new tasks, maybe a lot of new tasks quickly, and moving a large number of tasks quickly, or potentially deleting a large number of tasks quickly. The Gantt chart typically operates with one operation at a time, where you click on a button and we can add a task, and you got to type the task in and click save, and then the chart updates it. So it's a slower method. In this situation, we can switch to the tasks view. The tasks view has a couple of different modes. It has a Kanban mode, as well as a list view mode, and also a planning versus tracking mode. We need to be in planning mode when we're doing these kinds of changes to the plan, as we're not in tracking mode, which is used to keep track of updates from team members after the project has started. So at this point, our project is still in planning phase. We haven't even publish the project to our team members. So we really want to be using the planning mode. And you would also use the planning mode anytime during the project when you're just reviewing the plan, when you need to add tasks or move things around, delete things, refine things. So the difference here now is that you have each of the groups becomes a task group on the left, initiation phase, for example, or project planning, or even that identify potential issues that we saw earlier that we refined into a group. And the tasks within the group show up on the right-hand side. What's great about this particular scenario is that you can now add tasks on the right-hand side very easily simply by typing a task's title and pressing enter. So if we wanted to add another task of migration execution, let's say that this is additional task 1. All I need to do is type that in and press enter. I could then type in additional task 2 and additional task 3 quickly. If we went back to the timeline now, we'll see that additional task 1, 2, and 3 have shown up at the end of the migration execution group. And we need to still perform the linkage that we traditionally did. So if I double click this, delete that link, and drag this over here to this bar here, drag that here. So I'm just doing a finish to start relationship. And I think I dragged that to the group, which I shouldn't do. So we're going to go back, delete that. This is where it's useful to have this option of dragging it from here to the task you want. If I click auto schedule now, auto schedule will factor in those additional tasks. Let's look at it in week view to get a little bit more space. We can see those 3 tasks are now popped up here and are now part of the waterfall plan under migration execution. So switching to the list view here allowed us to do some quick typing of these new tasks. In the list view, you can also edit the titles of these tasks in case there's a mistake here. For example, let's say that we want to change these to be the letter form of those numbers. Then we just have to type that in and the titles are changed. So if I go back to the timeline, you'll see that those have indeed been updated, as opposed to double clicking each one, changing the text and clicking save on the task window. So this is a faster way of changing the titles of the task when you're reviewing your plan. Notice that in planning mode, at the entire project level, every subtask is displayed. And then clicking on each task group shows you the subtasks just within that group. So this is our list view feature, which allows you to really quickly edit tasks. Similarly, we can delete tasks. Let's say these 3 tasks were really not very specific. We just sort of put them in as additional task 1 and they're not meaningful. And we just decide that we're going to delete these. So I could select, you can notice I'm clicking the little box next to the little circle next to each of these tasks to select them. And if I click delete, it's going to ask me, do you want to delete all the selected tasks? I'll say yes. Those tasks are now gone. If I come back to the timeline, I now have the security. The last one was testing and validation, which is now in need of a relationship to final checks to complete the auto scheduling. So that I click the auto schedule button and we are back to our original plan, which looked like that. Another interesting feature to allow you to edit these tasks in a quick way is our copy paste or bulk insert feature. How we use this feature is, let's have a situation where we want to create a new task group in the project. So I'm going to go to the top level of the project and click plus. So this is creating a new task group, which is going to have subtasks inside it. Now let's create a task group and let's call it operational security. And click save. So that creates this task group. I'm going to click on the new task group, and now I can add tasks within this task group as usual. But in this case, I've already had a discussion with my team and the subject matter experts involved, and they have come up with a set of tasks. Let's say these are related to firewall upgrade, which is simply some example data here. I can then select the little drop down, add multiple tasks, which opens up a notepad-like experience where you can simply type a task title, for example, task 1, task 2, and each line becomes a task. Alternatively, that means I can just copy paste my 5 tasks, click the preview button, and MindStaq will parse the text and present what it's going to create as a result of what the text that was pasted. Once we're satisfied with this, we can increase durations or other basic attributes. We don't really touch the start date at this point because this is a waterfall plan and our start dates will be calculated based on relationships. So I don't really need to set the start dates. It's really durations that matter. And click add tasks. Now, once I've done that, to complete our planning process or planning update, we must go back to our timeline and see how we want to handle the ordering of these tasks. So we have this operational security group at the bottom, and we've got evaluation here. And let's say that this whole group needs to come before post-migration and after migration execution. Here's another great feature that when we're doing drag and drop, we can also collapse these down to different levels, like expand to level 1 or level 2, which shows you the second level. So the third level is still collapsed. I'm going to expand to level 1 to make this easy so I can see where operational security is. I'm going to click and drag the whole group between migration execution and post-migration. So that puts operational security over here, but I still need to fix a relationship. So once again, I'm going to expand these 2 groups, and this is the relationship that I need to delete, the one between the last task of migration execution and the first task of post-migration. Once I do that, I can then link these tasks. Let's say we'll keep it simple, and we'll say that each of these tasks is simply finish to start in a sequence. And then final checks. And then I click the auto schedule button. And once again, I'll get my revised waterfall, but now operational security has been factored in, new group. So this was done really quickly by using the list view in tasks to quickly copy paste some tasks. Come back to the Gantt chart view where we can handle ordering. We can also drag and drop to reorder the tasks and then change the relationships. Click auto schedule, and we have our revised plan. Now that we're satisfied with the structure of our plan and we've got the dependencies identified, the final step we have to perform is to remember to activate our project plan. This is what makes it active, which means that task assignments can be viewed by team members. Other team members other than project managers will see the project, and this is an important step not to miss. Otherwise, your plan is still in a draft state. And activation is simply to go to the project settings dialog and click the activate button. And now the project is active, which means we can start updating tasks that have been assigned to different people. At this point, we haven't actually assigned tasks to any owners, but one advantage of the tasks view over the timeline view is that instead of double-clicking and assigning owners one by one using the task window, we can very quickly figure out the ownership of tasks using the list view here. So if I click on this initiation phase, I could quickly assign these to different people in my team, and they can provide updates. Since it's auto-save, we don't have to do anything else. The tasks have already been updated. Let's now see what this view looks like from the perspective of one of the team members. So I'm going to refresh the projects page, and we see this new Exchange Server Migration to Cloud project has shown up. And also on the project dashboard for John Diggle, we see that he's got one active task, which is Customer Requirements Plan. He can open that up and look at it. He can also add to-dos to it. So let's just expand. He can expand on what the steps are that are required to perform this Customer Requirements Plan. So identify requirements, draft requirement document, and then perhaps get feedback on requirements document. So can save that, and that way John Diggle, if he goes to his My Tasks, will see this new project as well as any tasks that need to be done. Now, since we set the project start date to 11th of December, it is actually starting next week and not this week. But of course, John could go ahead and perform steps like identifying to-dos and things in advance of the start of this project. Now that we've activated the project and we've even seen some updates coming in from some of our team members, let's look at next week. And let's switch to the Gantt view for a second with the Kanban view of these. And we can see the tasks have the to-dos that John has identified. And to show you what happens when updates come in, let's look at team members providing some of these updates. So let's assume that the kickoff meeting task has started, and let's actually, for the purposes of this example, complete that task. So at this point, if we went back to the Gantt chart, we can see that the Gantt has changed to 100%, and the blue bar has become gray. The blue bar turns red when it's overdue. It turns gray when it's completed. And we're now ready for John to supply some updates. At this point, let's switch back to John. Let's say that John chooses to start his task. So he says he's 45% complete. He can send a message to the project channel showing some updates here about what he's done. So he could provide notes. So let's just create some test notes here about what the progress is and why it's at 45% at the moment. And he can start the task. He can also simply check this box to mark these two to-dos as completed. So assuming that we've completed the draft requirements and identifying requirements. At this point, we can come back here to the task board and we can see John's updates. 2 of 3 to-dos have been checked, and he's got some progress here as well, 45%. What if John now requests that we need to have more time? So one thing he could do right away is request more time, and John can select which project manager to send this request to, so that that person is addressed in the message that's going to go into the project channel, and request 2 more days. Click send request. What happens now is in the message channel, we see that there's a new message and it says action requested. And the request is, at Sai, I'll require 2 more days to complete this task. At this point, as a project manager, I can simply click the task name to open the task window and look at this task, and it's originally marked as a 1-day task. So I'm going to increase the duration to 2 days and click save. So at this point, I've actually extended the time of the task by 2 more days, 2 more working days, not counting weekends. And I'm going to reply saying, done, you can have 2 more working days, and put that reply in the channel here. I can then come back to the project. You can see that the project has turned to 6%. It's in the green because there are no issues at this point. And let's go back to the timeline. At this point, the customer requirements plan, as you can see, has gone to 3 days. And now we have an overlap with one of the subsequent tasks. And this is because we have not clicked auto schedule yet. So this is an intentional feature in MindStaq where updates can come in, decisions can be made, and when the project manager is ready to review the impact on the schedule, you can click auto schedule and see what's happening. As this starts right from the top of the tasks, almost everything in the plan is going to get affected, since these are the first few tasks of the plan, and the subsequent tasks are all going to get moved out by those 2 days. So we can see that the original end date of the project was Feb 1st, and it's going to become Feb 5th, probably because of a weekend. So I'm going to commit those changes, scroll down here and have a look here, and yes, there's a weekend there. And so the actual last task will finish, and the project will effectively be completed by Monday the 5th, with Thursday and Friday here being the last working days. So that's how we receive an update from a user requesting more time. We factor it in, and then we come and hit the auto schedule button to recalculate the project schedule. We wouldn't have to do this once per task. Typically, when you have a weekly status meeting or updates on a daily basis, you could choose to review the schedule once a day and see all the changes that are going to come and decide if those changes are acceptable and if the project schedule is still within reasonable bounds in terms of the end date. In the test project that we've been using so far, whenever we were reviewing tasks in the tracking mode, we had to switch the filter here from this week, that's tasks that are active this week, to next week, simply because our test project began on the 11th of December. And at the moment, we aren't in the 11th of December today. The day of this recording is the 6th of December. And that's why we have to switch this. But this is actually an important feature. Whenever you're in tracking mode, you can decide what you want to focus on. The tasks that are happening today, even which task owners. So during a weekly status meeting or team update meeting, you could review tasks by selecting the time period. It could be the whole month. We could review all the tasks that are going to be happening this month. If we're just talking about what tasks are planned for this month, or we could be getting updates from team members for what's happening. So for example, in this project, it's going to be next week, simply because the project start date is set for the future in this example. Let's look at another situation which is more realistic around the use of that project start date. What happens very often is a project will start and priorities will shift. And sometimes that project will have a waterfall project plan, which is now kind of stuck in limbo. One of the features MindStaq has is the ability to archive a project as on hold. So we can look at archive projects here, and I can see that I've got a company website project that got deprioritized and it's been put on hold, and it's a waterfall project. I can tell from the 2 labels that's on the project card here. I can click on that project and go into the settings and reopen this project. It's going to switch this back to planning mode. As soon as it's in planning mode, I can go to the timeline and decide how I wanted to handle this. So this project had a couple of tasks that were done at 100%, and then really everything was not done from that point, and the project was put on hold. And these dates now are from September 2023, and I want to restart this project. I have two options at this point. I could try to factor in the delay of the project as a task that we can put in here saying delay and push all the tasks out to today's date. Or I could simply decide that those two tasks would need to be repeated anyway. We need to go review those requirements to see if they're still the same. And so I'm just going to use the project start date feature to reschedule and restart this entire project. How I could do that is I could select today's date from, so let's say the 6th of November. Sorry, the 4th of, let's say the 4th of December, this week, the start of this week. And save that. Then come back to the timeline and click the auto schedule button, which is now going to move everything that started previously at September 1st to December 4th. So that's, once you have your schedule calculated, it's easy to then do an action like this where you need to revive a project plan and move the whole thing forward to a new date. And now we have all these tasks that are ready to go. At this point, I could come to the timeline very quickly and simply reverse the progress here by clicking the little bar to drag that to 0, and that as well to 0. And so that task is now overdue because we supposedly started on Monday. But that could just refresh the whole plan. And I also have to remember to activate it. Once I've done this, we go back to the project dashboard, we see the plan is back to being active and ready to go. So this is one of the other ways you can use the project start date, as well as the on hold feature, which is an archive option, to revive a project, put a project on hold, and then bring it back when the time is right. Our final feature that we're going to discuss for these waterfall projects is the backlog feature. So if we went back to the Exchange Server migration project that we've been using throughout most of this presentation, we planned this project, we started it, we had a number of tasks added here. What happens over time is that as the project progresses, we realize that there are ad hoc tasks or tasks that are recommended by our subject matter experts, our team members, that we didn't consider when we initially planned the project. Every team member can contribute what are called backlog tasks. Since backlog tasks are officially not scheduled, which means no one can work on them, they don't show up on anyone's task list, and they require a project manager to review them before they become active. The interesting effect of this is that when you go to the timeline, which is the official scheduled version of the project with the dependencies and the ordering of tasks, backlog tasks simply don't appear here because they're not officially on the schedule. So backlog tasks is a great way to park things that you're not sure about, but you've heard about or discussed or have a team member recommend. So let's say we came to the pre-migration step here and we wanted to add someone suggested a couple of tasks for pre-migration, such as reviewing automated tools to test the migration. So this was a suggested task and we put it in backlog. When we come to the timeline under pre-migration, we're going to see that there is no sign of this task because it is a backlog task. So that's a great way to park things that come up but still require some thought, some review, or simply should not be worked on. So you can also take an existing task and drag it to the backlog. So let's take an example in the pre-migration step. That backup current system, let's decide that we don't want to currently work on that. So if we move it to backlog and come back to timeline, we'll see that that's gone from the pre-migration section. This is of course going to affect your relationships, which means that relationships will need to be reviewed and fixed to identify the gap here, because we got rid of a task and put it into backlog. We can also simply restore that with relationships intact if we made a mistake by simply dragging the backlog backup current system back to the not started column. So we come back here, and we'll see that the backup is back and the relationships are back and intact. A quick way to check that relationships have no effect is to click the auto schedule button. We made some changes earlier, so we can review that and we can click commit, but we can see that we're happy that the project is still finishing at the same time, which is the 2nd of February. Coming back to the backlog, we now decide that we want to do this task. So the pre-migration, we're going to do this reviewing automated. So we'll drag it to not started to make it a legitimate task. And now we come to the timeline and we perform the same steps we did earlier to link this task to the current tasks. We can delete the existing relationship, drag this last task to this next task, drag this task to the next task over here, click auto schedule, and we should have our fixed revised schedule with the new task. So that's how a backlog task can be created to document tasks that come up that we need to now factor into the schedule, but we are not ready to factor in. As soon as we have more information about the task, we can factor it in, update the relationships, and then click the auto schedule button to make sure that the project schedule is recalculated. So that pushes our start date out a little bit to the following week, as we introduced this 2-day task reviewing automated tools. And that's how we can use this backlog feature to park tasks that need to be reviewed before they affect our project schedule. With that, this training video is now complete. We have 2 more Waterfall training videos that will be coming out soon. The first one will be an advanced Waterfall project management video, which will cover things like using other relationship types in dependencies like finish to finish relationships, using lag and lead times to move task start dates, as well as factoring delays and delegated task ownership. Our third video is going to cover tips and tricks in dealing with Waterfall projects, including task versioning, to-dos versus subtasks, importing an existing project plan, sharing data from the Gantt chart using the export feature, as well as some of the interesting things we can do with the Gantt chart's filters and table view. So stay tuned for those videos.